Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video. And yes, you read the title, you know exactly what documentary this is that I'm reviewing. This documentary that, ever since I first heard about this, I was excited, I couldn't wait to watch this, and finally, I did. I watched it on YouTube, and yeah, I gotta say, it did not disappoint for me. I really enjoyed it. Everything from beginning to end. What this documentary is all about. And of course, yeah, this documentary being on the dude who brought us this iconic comic book superhero. Yeah, from Dark Horse Comics. So yes, that's right. I am finally reviewing the documentary on the Hellboy creator himself, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters. Yes, the documentary on Mike himself. Yeah, good old Mike Mignola. Again, the creator of Hellboy, and, yeah. Again, I knew that I was going to enjoy this, and I did. Just everything about what this documentary has to offer about Mike Mignola. And when I first heard about this documentary, well, I didn't really know fully what to expect, but duh, it should have occurred to me that, this would be about Mignola's life and, when Hellboy stepped in his life and when he created that character, and yeah, a good majority of this documentary focuses a lot on Hellboy. And understandable why, because, again, the character of Hellboy himself having a huge part in Mignola's life, and, the struggles that Mike went through, even before he would create, say, Hellboy, and even when he did create Hellboy, a bit of a rocky start and such. And, of course, when it would come to, trying to make a movie adaptation of Hellboy, and it took 6 years to make, and when Del Toro stepped in, all this other stuff that Mike did, and really trying to get his work out there, his art style. Nobody could really draw like Mike, and how he's, touched a lot of people, and, some inspirations that made Mike what he is today, and then leading to Mike being an inspiration to a lot of others. Yeah, because those that are a part of this documentary, Mike has a huge influence on them, and those that love and appreciate his work, his art style, the comics that he's brought us, Hellboy, most notably. Yeah, ups and downs that Mike went through, but at the same time, he managed to, make a good success out of himself, and, because when, he would find himself being a part of Dark Horse Comics, and, some people that would enter in his life, and, yeah, and those that, would become a part of what he does, being a part of Dark Horse, and, more people that would step in doing more of Hellboy and such, and Del Toro being the best example, because, yeah, bringing Hellboy to life on the big screen. Yeah, just overall, this documentary was really good. I really enjoyed this, with what this had to offer, and when it comes to documentaries, because, yeah, we know this person and such, and this documentary centering on this and that, but at the same time, we don't fully know that much. That is until we see documentaries like these. We learn more about this and so on, a person, etc. You see what I mean? And some things, stuff from the person's personal life and such, and yeah, what we learn about Mike Mignola, what his life was like, and the fact, because, some stuff that was in his life would be a big influence for, say, what he does, and for the character of Hellboy. Need I go on? Yeah. And not to mention, because, the fact that Mignola, he did start off doing, say, Marvel and DC, and Jack Kirby being an inspiration. But, yeah, just overall, the documentary itself, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters, excellent documentary. Any of you like me who are fans of his, especially a fan of this guy, yeah, this is definitely the documentary for you. And especially anybody who doesn't know that much of Mike Mignola, who are big fans of him, but don't know that much, and yeah, again, and just, yeah, this documentary is for you. Alright, so, with the first things I've had to say out of the way, now, as always, read the description / the story. In a depth look at comic book legend Mike Mignola and the universe he created around Hellboy, including never-before-seen interviews conducted at his studio, drawing demonstrations, and footage from workshops and comic book conventions. Okay, so, getting into the documentary itself, yep, because, where I want to first start off, well, because, yeah, obviously you should start with his background, you know, because, when he was born and, you know, having been raised in a family where he had 2 siblings, and, he and his brothers, which being Scott and Todd, they were raised, and they had a workaholic father. And the thing about Mike, Scott, and Todd, their father, well, yeah, again, as I just said, he was a workaholic dad, and with what they describe about their father, and that especially goes for Mike, well, he wasn't a bad father, he wasn't anything like that, no. He was from, like, say, that generation where he didn't show to his kids that he loved them. And, you know, the fact, because, sadly, another thing is, all 3 of them, they would sadly lose their mother at a young age, you know, to cancer and such, which, you know, is really a shame. So they only had their dad, but at least, you know, they were okay, you know, and they did perfectly well, being raised by their dad only, and, well, not to mention that, their dad viewed them as, like, weird aliens from another planet or something. Just the way that the Mignola brothers acted, you know, they were rambunctious, they loved doing stuff, being playful, adventurous, you know what I mean? Yeah, because that's what they were like. And because that, you know, they grew up in California, well, one of the things that they loved doing was, you know, like, most notably Mike, having gone to many bookstores. And he became a big reader, you know, a readaholic, I guess you could say, and being influenced on a lot of stuff, and, you know, not to mention that, this was mentioned at the start of the documentary, where one of the, inspirations for Mike, you know, incorporating the stuff that's in Hellboy is, an American writer by the name of Frank R. Scotton. Yeah, I got that right. Yeah, if you think about it, and if you are familiar with the work and writing of Frank Scotton, then you know, and, well, Frank Scotton's work being a big influence on what Mike Mignola would bring to the Hellboy comics. Yeah, because, like, with ghosts and, you know, paranormal stuff, just, yeah, nice. Yeah, and, well, you know, life for Mignola, you know, during childhood and such, was, I think, as I recall, like, yeah, very mixed and such. And, well, he would find himself being inspired to, you know, wanting to draw monsters for a living with what he would see, and that would be a big influence on him. And, you know, from there on, and as he got older, you know, he would spend, at one point he would spend 2 years in art school, and, you know, eventually still making his way further, and when, like, say, at one point, he would make his way to, say, like, you know, New York City, and, you know, he would find himself trying to find some work, doing some drawings and stuff like that. And, like, say, when, you know, he would find himself first working at, like, say, Marvel, and what he would do at Marvel, well, not that good. It was really not that good for Mike, because, you know, some of the Marvel comics that he was involved in were, like, say, The Defenders, Rocket Raccoon, The Incredible Hulk, and also something from the Marvel Comics Kung Fu Master. Yeah, I think I got that right. But just, yeah, at a certain point, you know, Mike was not having a good time working at Marvel, as I'm sure he thought he would, but just no. And like I said, Jack Kirby having a big influence on Mike. The work of Jack Kirby, you know, being a big influence on Mike, and to anybody else, yeah, that has followed in the footsteps and has been inspired by the legendary Jack Kirby. Yeah, because, yeah, with that. And also because at one point, Mike would come face to face and be buddies with these two guys, and they seem to have the same personality and such, you know, because with what they do, and all three of them getting along so well. The two guys being Art Adams, and and as he's credited, he's an artist doing Spider-Man, X-Men, and we also have Steve Purcell? Yeah. Steve Purcell, whom is someone else that, became good friends with Mike Mignola, and this, comic book that he was responsible for doing. Not to mention that, because Sam and Max, that's the name of the comic, yeah, Sam and Max. He's also become a director and someone at Pixar, which is really cool. So yeah, so that's it, Sam and Max, yeah. I think, yeah, because I know a little of Sam and Max, because, yeah, the look of the characters, yeah, especially I've seen the rabbit, yeah, yeah, so that's really cool, because, yeah, who'd have thought that, the creator of Hellboy being good friends with the creator of Sam and Max, yeah. Yeah, so, a friendship would grow between them, and acting like, a bit of teenagers, like going to see movies or reading books and so on, just, yeah. And at the time, they were living together. They were sharing an apartment, and, all three of them, especially Mike's, still struggling, but at the same time, they managed to pull through, even, if I'm correct fully, because it seems like, and with what the documentary describes, they created this thing called Fizzball. Now, I am very familiar with Fizzball, and I'm sure the same goes for you. Because what started off as, Mike's father buying these cheap, beer cans, and then, Mike and his two friends, they would make a game out of it and such, and by basically, taking a baseball bat and, by throwing the can and boom, and just, it would explode and so on. And apparently that blew up worldwide. It did start off in the Sam and Max cartoons. Well, not cartoons, the comics. Yeah. But, that's pretty interesting, because from what came from, say, Mike, Art, and Steve, and how Steve would incorporate that in the Sam and Max comics, Fizzball, and then boom, it would blow up. That's pretty interesting. That I did not know of until this documentary. Alright, so next thing I want to talk about is, the fact that Mike and his two brothers, they had loved, taking walks and such at this beautiful cemetery in Oakland, California. And yeah, by the way, because, with Mike having grown up in California, in one part of California, just, have to mention, of course, but yeah, but point being is that, this beautiful cemetery that they would take walks, and that would be an influence on Mike. The look in some parts of this cemetery, which being Mountain View Cemetery, and yeah, because having seen shots of this cemetery in the documentary, and with what they say, yeah, it's true, because it's a beautiful cemetery. And the fact that I didn't know about this either, that this cemetery at Oakland, California, was designed by the same man who was the designer for Central Park, New York. That's pretty interesting. Again, that I did not know until now, thanks to this documentary. What did I tell you earlier? Because some stuff we don't know of until when, say, watching documentaries. Yeah. So yeah, and as I brought up earlier, because yeah, when it comes to, say, them talking about this cemetery, and they bring up, the loss of their mother, because yes, she died of cancer, it was colon cancer. And the fact that because they lost their mother at a young age, it's only Mike that mentions this, that he was only 7 years old when his mother passed away. And, seen some photos, I should say. Photos, of Mignola's mother. A very beautiful, nice lady, and pardon me for saying this, but I can kind of tell, because looking at some of those pictures, and I guess depending on, exactly when they were taken, yeah, because I can see in those pictures, that, it seemed like, she was a bit sick or something. I don't know. If you get what I'm saying, just bear with me. And they even show a photo of, well, I presume it's the spot, the cemetery spot, of the gravesite of the Mignola brothers' mother. So yeah. But as I was saying about this cemetery being a big influence on Mignola, the look and style to the cemetery, and how he would incorporate some of those spots and locations in the cemetery in his art style, like some of the statues of the angels, and, and the mausoleum, even at one point he couldn't remember a specific spot at the cemetery where, he was so influenced by the look and style to it, if you know what I'm talking about, and if any of you had been at that cemetery and had managed to found what Mike couldn't find, good on you. But now let's talk about, say, when Mike would do something Batman. So one thing that I mentioned, where Jack Kirby's work and style being an influence, one of those influences on Mignola, and because when it came to, like, say, Mignola, drawing and doing, the ink and paint and such, and when drawing the characters, because, and, like I said, when doing that for, like, say, the Marvel Comics, and how it's explained in the documentary, just overall, not really good. Well, when it would come to, say, Batman, Mike did a Batman comic for DC, obviously, actually for Archie, actually, is what they say. And with what Mike wanted to do for this Batman comic, it was one of the Legends of the Dark Knight. Yeah, that's right, Legends of the Dark Knight. And with what Mike brought to this Batman comic, part of the Legends of the Dark Knight, which being the Sanctum, and as I said, the cemetery at Oakland, California, being an influence on Mike, he would incorporate some of that stuff at the cemetery in this comic, and this adventure that Batman goes through in this cemetery, and where Batman finds himself in. You've read the comic, I'm pretty sure, so you know exactly. I don't have to go into full detail. But overall, when making that Batman comic, it blew up. It was a success. And that comic, that Batman comic, spoke Mike Mignola all over. It said everything about him. What he brought to that comic, its style, it said everything about him. And those that talk about that comic, and to mention more of those that are a part of this documentary, like, well, most notably, Guillermo del Toro, because, what he had to say about that Batman comic, and because, saying that it said a lot about, about Mignola. Also, Patton Oswalt being in this documentary, and as I recall, saying some compliments about that comic too. And to everybody else that was a part of this documentary, I'll go ahead and mention them, like there was Stephen Green, there was Duncan Fagretto, if I'm getting the last name right. There's Henry Gilroy, Tad Stones, and there's also Mike Richardson, and there's also Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman making an appearance in this, and I don't think the documentary establishes this, but because Gaiman being another, influence on Mignola, because mentioning something about not able to do something specific like what Neil Gaiman has done, you know what I mean? But it's good to see then, because no doubt that for Neil Gaiman, because, admiring what Mike Mignola does. And isn't Mir... They're about in that same territory with what Neil Gaiman and Mignola do. I'm pretty sure, and I'm sure, you guys would think so too. And some of the others that are in this documentary that I'll mention, because, like, Michael Avon Oeming and Rebecca Sugar. Rebecca Sugar being in this documentary too, the creator of Steven Universe, and she was influenced by Mike Mignola, so yeah, good to see her being a part of this documentary. And I'll mention the other later on, but just, overall, those that compliment on that one Batman comic that Mike Mignola did, and some of them saying that this is pre-Hellboy. Yeah, it's like, Batman is playing the part of Hellboy. And that's the thing, because, with the Batman comic being a huge success, and, Mike Mignola was starting to get there, well, that's when it had occurred to him that he wanted to do this again, and he needed a character of his own that can do this full time, the paranormal stuff, ghosts and everything, wanting his own Batman, basically. And at one point at a convention, he had to draw something in this, like, guidebook or something, one of those. And he drew this cool monster that, had these, like, horns and looking like a devil creature, But there was one thing missing, and the fact that in the drawing, Mignola, added in, like, a utility belt or something, And then he wrote a name, which, of course, being this. Yeah. And everybody loved it. Not to mention that we get to see the drawing, the original drawing of what was the early prototype of Hellboy. Yeah. And it being framed, and it's in Mignola's house, and, it's pretty much become, like, a historical art piece, when you say so, and how Mignola puts at it. And that would be the beginning of creating this character. So, when developing the character of Hellboy further, finding the official look and design, and the fact that, well, most notably, Hellboy having his horns cut off and such, and even, like, say, how Mignola's wife first reacted to this. Yeah, because Mignola's wife, Christine Betty Mignola, appearing in this documentary, according to Mike, Christine's first reaction to this, and with what her husband was creating, this character, she rolled her eyes, and, I mean, she was supportive, obviously, but wasn't really sure at first that maybe this would succeed or something, just, because you never know the first time. And, she was, like, at one point thinking that, we're still gonna live in a studio building and such, But, as Mignola proceeded on making this character, and when something else big would come Mignola's way, as well as his character. Enter Dark Horse Comics. Yes, this is where we come to the part where, Dark Horse Comics being created and such, and, the man in charge of Dark Horse Comics, which, of course, being Mike Richardson, publisher and the man in charge of Dark Horse Comics. And basically, Dark Horse Comics, being this, like, comic book business, something very different than, say, Marvel and DC, to bring in those who have creative ideas and to be open with their ideas. And Mike Mignola being one of those perfect people. And because when Mignola, Mike Richardson, and with Dark Horse Comics and Hellboy would cross paths, from there on, they would make comic book history. And, the first, comics being published that, Mignola did of Hellboy, and with his art style and such, like, doing these, like, mini comic books and such, once again, another rough start for Mignola. I mean, nothing really bad or extreme, but, still. And also, can't forget to mention this, the further, like, development for the character of Hellboy, and what he was inspired from, based on, etc. Well, the character of Hellboy is inspired a lot by Mignola's father, because, as mentioned about Mignola's father early on, well, because the fact that he was a workaholic, but also it was mentioned that every time he would come back to work or whatever it is that Mignola's father was doing, he was a very tough guy. He was a very tough guy. Basically, in part of my French, he didn't give a shit if he was, like, say, very injured or wounded. Like, say, he would come home with, like, bleed marks or, like, cuts and so on his arms, or, you know, even, like, taking out a stick or something from his head. And he would handle it like a boss, you know? He didn't care. And, and what would be incorporated into the character of Hellboy, that Hellboy is so tough and he doesn't care the many countless times that Hellboy would get bashed or thrown or injured, and also when it would, because, seeing, like, the blood and such on Mignola's father's arm, well, that being an influence on Hellboy's, you know, rock arm, you know, because his stoned hand, that too. And, you know, how the look and design of Hellboy came to be, well, because, you know, like a mixture of, like, say, Frankenstein's monster, gorilla, and having like, that hawk chest, and it all looked pretty good, but it was missing one more thing. And thus, what the last thing was missing by putting the character of Hellboy together was his coat. Yes, the coat that he wears, because we see this in the documentary where Mignola, you know, years before creating Hellboy, he bought this coat because having loved these westerns and these specific coats that these cowboys wear, and thus, Mike, you know, getting a coat like that and still having that coat, and that coat would be incorporated into the character of Hellboy, and that would be the iconic look to this one superhero from the comic books, Hellboy, because, you know, it's like, hey, Batman is Batman with his cape. Same goes for Superman. These certain things that superheroes have, like, rather if it's a cape or a weapon or something, that says it all on those characters. Okay, and as I brought up, where, Mignola would cross paths and be a part of Dark Horse Comics, and like I said, with what was being done for Dark Horse Comics to be a creative, you know, freedom thing for anybody that, you know, came to Dark Horse Comics and they are, you know, free and to be creative and such, just, and, you know, from Neil Gaiman, and also this one guy that I cannot forget to mention is Ben Saunders. Ben Saunders, from the University of Oregon, if I'm saying that right, in Portland, and he's also, the director of comics and cartoon studies, and he is a professor. You know, like, there's one moment where Ben Saunders brings up that, Alan Moore once said that with Mignola's style of drawings and comics and such, it's like if Jack Kirby's work was lit by German expressionist filmmakers. Am I getting that one word right? Well, you know what I mean. And also, because, to mention more on those that are a part of this documentary, like an editor at Dark Horse Comics for Hellboy, Katie O'Brien, like, with what she has to say about, you know, Mignola's art style and such, and the fact, because, with it being very dark and not that much on the backgrounds with what they specifically say, with what they specifically say, but just, it's just, there has never been anything like what Mignola has brought to the world of artistry and comics altogether. And there's one moment where some of them in the documentary explaining that they tried at one point to do exactly what Mignola does, like most notably Jason Sean Alexander, whom is an artist and has done stuff like Spawn and Ape Sapien, what he's credited for. He tried doing that, trying to be like Mignola, but, you know, just couldn't. And also, a moment where, George R. Gutierrez, if I'm getting the last name right, again, you know me sometimes, he's a director, and he's done, say, Maya and the 3 and the Book of Life, and he brings up at one point where when he was at Cal Arts, an art teacher asked the students to bring in some different, like, art pieces, whatever, and they can break it down. And, well, George, being influenced and liking the work of Mike Mignola, he brought in something Hellboy. And, when it came to, say, Hellboy, just the art teacher, according to George, just, breaking down on the art style of Mike and, what Mike has brought to this and that. Yeah, it's amazing. And it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter, especially, like, if it's at Cal Arts and all animation, because, drawings and stuff like that, even if it doesn't come to life, still, But yeah, that's just amazing. Also, to go ahead and mention him, Adam Savage. Yep, Adam Savage, whom appears in this documentary, and he too being so influenced by Mike Mignola, especially being a huge fan of Hellboy, because, to go ahead and mention it, and now that I brought up Adam Savage, ever since Adam Savage saw the 2 Hellboy films, it would lead to Adam getting every single Hellboy comic that he can get, and and that's another thing, because, I'll mention it a little later when we get to the Hellboy, the first 2 Hellboy films. Oh, yeah. Oh, and one more thing on Adam Savage for right now, because, with him reading the Hellboy comics, because being so amazed and marveled by, the art style, and he would just go back to some pages and look beat by beat at those pages. Just, with what Adam says, understandable, because, again, nothing, just anything like what Mignola does. Yeah. Alright, so, next up, let's talk more about Mignola's wife, Christine. Yeah, because I had a feeling that at some point this would be brought up, and yes, how he and his wife first met. Not to mention that, she has, a good chunk of times, helped out her hubby on some certain things, especially, when Mignola was, starting off with Hellboy and such, and, even Mignola mentioning, that his wife gave him advice, if you want to do this, do it again, and so on. But basically, how Mike and Christine met was, according to Christine most notably, they first met in April of 1988. Coincidentally, each of them, were attending these bachelor parties. Yeah, these 2 bachelor parties that each of them were a part of, and, Christine and some of her friends noticing this long, table with guys in glasses, and, just overall, Mignola and Christine, they met, and, I didn't mention this until now, where, I can't forget to mention this as well, where, it's said in the documentary that Mignola, especially in the early days, being very shy and so on, and it's understandable why, being too shy, obviously, to, like, ask for Christine's number, even, Mignola's friends, wondering if, he's gonna, ask for Christine's number, which he did after getting very drunk, so but, just overall, Mignola and Christine, they did hit it off pretty good. And 3 months later, Mignola moved in with Christine. And according to Christine, because where Mignola was living at, he didn't have any air conditioning. Ugh. And thus, moving in with her because, she had it. And then 2 years later, they found themselves married. Yeah. And also, not to also mention that Christine had a huge part with the character of Hellboy, helping out and encouraging Mignola, of course, and with what's specifically described in this documentary. So and basically, without Christine, Mignola wouldn't be where he's at, and with the character of Hellboy altogether. Okay, so another thing that's brought up in the documentary, is the fact that Mignola wasn't really sure and thought that, because he was not able to, like, say, come up and write for stories and such, and, you know, with doing the comic books. But eventually, he did start to, but, you know, he felt, and even, like, when Christine mentions that when he would come up with a story while he was taking a shower, and he would obviously finish taking a shower, go down and write the story, then he would all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm a failure and such, because the first two that he wrote, well, I seem to recall, like, not that good, or, you know, even to Mike's liking, but it wasn't until another story that he wrote for another Hellboy comic, which being The Corpse. That one is what really blew up. And, you know, basically, according to Mike, with this one, The Corpse, he wrote a story for Hellboy where it was funny, and it was short, but it had a lot of story to it. You know, and best said by Katie O'Brien, because, yeah, this was a big hit for not only Mike, but also Dark Horse, and for, you know, Hellboy in general. And even, you know, from, like, say, Neil Gaiman and Del Toro complimenting on The Corpse, and Del Toro mentioning that he owns a good chunk of art pieces of The Corpse, and one that took him a long time to find, but just, yeah. And also, when it's brought up on, like, say, more that he would do in the world of Hellboy, folklore, and so on, what he would incorporate into the stories of Hellboy, and what Hellboy would come face to face with, and with what's specifically said in this documentary, yeah, because things just looking better than ever for Mignola and his creation, his baby, Hellboy, yeah. Even, like, say, yeah, because, more that, talk about this, and, you know, with what they have to say, because, yeah, because, you know, one guy talking about, like, say, yeah, Victor Laval, if I'm saying that right, because, he's credited, credited being, because he's an author, he's done, say, The Challenging and The Ballad of Black Tom. So what, you know, from, like, say, him and, also, Ben Saunders, what they have to say about with what Mike would incorporate into the Hellboy comics, folklore, and all that kind of stuff, and still, the inspirations for Mike Mignola and how it had influenced him to add this and that to Hellboy, just, you know, extraordinary. Okay, now, let's talk about, and yeah, it's obvious that this is something that I think for a lot of us, we were looking forward to be talked about, right? When at one point in the 90s, and at that point when Hellboy was, you know, really going pretty well, and where Mignola was at that point with the character, and after, say, The Corpse, well, Dark Horse, you know, recommended to, and told Mignola that he should option, you know, Hellboy to be made into a movie and so on, just, yeah, and yes, this is where we get into the territory when it would come to, say, the first attempts on making a Hellboy movie, yes, and, well, you know, Mignola, not in a greedy way, he was more than happy to do so for whomever would turn his creation into a movie, and he didn't really think at first that it could happen, but enter Guillermo del Toro. Yes, this is where, yeah, we get to Del Toro, you know, and where he's properly introduced in this documentary, because, yeah, Del Toro, he had been a follower of Mike's since Mike's days at DC, and Del Toro knowing exactly who Mike is, his art style and such, you know, the big lips and tiny feet, yeah, that being in Mike's design for characters and such. And that being another thing, too, because, as it is mentioned in the documentary, because with what he would bring to those characters, you know, for, like, say, Marvel and DC, but, yeah, anyways. So, in the 90s, when Del Toro was making Mimic, well, Ron Perlman said that he was going through a rough patch after Mimic, but, you know, when he was making Mimic, he would go to a comic book store in Toronto trying to get a new issue of Hellboy because, yeah, you know, the Hellboy comics were Del Toro's happy place. Because, again, going through rough patches, Perlman says, you know, when making Mimic, And, well, Del Toro knew that he would be the one to bring a movie to life that has this character. Yeah. And also, yeah, because I mentioned Ron Perlman, so great to see that, yeah, because with Del Toro, we get Ron Perlman and Doug Jones. Yes, Doug Jones being in this documentary as well. And yeah, because we do see them earlier in this documentary, and with, you know, what they've said about Mike Mignola and his art style and such, and yeah, Doug Jones as well, just, yeah. So, when it would come to, say, Del Toro, having meet Mignola at Dark Horse Comics, well, yeah, because Del Toro basically making it clear to Mignola and the others that he's the man that wants to help by bringing Hellboy to life on the big screen. And, well, the first meeting that Del Toro and Mignola had in Portland, the location where Dark Horse Comics is, and the place they went to have the meeting was at Powell's, and poor Mike Richardson, because Mike Richardson was worried how the meeting would go, because, well, Mike Mignola having a bit of a temper and such, and if anybody were to suggest Mignola on, like, say, recommending this or that, then he would kind of lose his shit, but, you know, still. So, with Mike Richardson being worried, and even after leaving them at Powell's, just, yeah, that's when it was Del Toro's idea, and by telling Mignola that they should pull a trick / joke / prank on poor Mike Richardson. Basically, yeah, having Mike think that the meeting went horrible, it tanked and such. So, I mean, well, obviously it didn't, because Mike and Del Toro, they got along really well, so the meeting went pretty well. But after the meeting, Del Toro called up Richardson and said that, you know, it was so horrible and so on, yeah. And then, of course, yeah, then telling Richardson that, you know, just kidding, it went pretty well. So, oh my gosh, they really wanted to get poor Mike just up on his, like, toes or something, just, like, really just collapse, you know, just, like, oh, just, like, really the anxiety built up to him. But, no, again, surprisingly, it did went pretty well, because, yeah, this would be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, a bromance, best way to put at it, for Mike Mignola and Del Toro. And yeah, so plans going underway to possibly try to get a Hellboy movie made, especially because, you know, with what Del Toro was going through, making Mimic, and yeah, the Hellboy comics were his happy place, he really wanted to make a movie of Hellboy to show the love of the character and such that he has for Hellboy. So yeah, and, well, you know, another thing is, both Mignola and Del Toro knew exactly who the right man would be to play the title character, and that, of course, being Ron Perlman. So they had already chosen Ron Perlman, and, you know, by that point, Del Toro knew Perlman, and, well, they too being good friends. And, well, Ron Perlman being one of Del Toro's lucky charms, being in a good chunk of his movies, even after, say, the Hellboy films, yeah. So they found their leading man to play the character himself, yes, and, yeah. However, problem is, because they had already chosen Ron Perlman, and, you know, with them, you know, having this be, to proceed on further, you know, the plans to make a Hellboy film, it took 6 years for a Hellboy movie to be made. Reason being is, well, and I'm sure, of course, you know this, that not a studio would lay a finger on it, because, you know, the fact that this movie, being a comic book adaptation of this red guy with a tail, and whom would be playing Hellboy, no studio would have it. And even, like, say, at one point, you know, and best said by Del Toro in archival footage of at a press and panel where, you know, according to Del Toro, it was suggested, like, say, maybe The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, should play Hellboy, and Del Toro was like, F that, and yeah, Del Toro didn't give a shit about what the studio said. He was gonna do Hellboy his way, whether if any studio liked it or not, and if they would proceed on financing and having this be greenlit. And also, another recommendation, besides The Rock, was Vin Diesel, which, yeah, there's no way that that would have gone well if either one of them would have played Hellboy. No, because Del Toro knew who he wanted specifically to play Hellboy. Ron Perlman, yeah, because, Ron Perlman, because, especially with a bit of his personality and such, that's Hellboy right there for you, just, But, yeah, with trying to get a Hellboy movie being made for 6 years, still having no luck, especially with what Del Toro was known for at that time, and he didn't do any action-packed film, especially that involved, like, say, comic book heroes or anything. And then it wasn't until, somewhere in the early 2000s, Del Toro's agent suggested to Del Toro that he should work on Blade 2, and thus, that's what Del Toro did. He did Blade 2 for a few good reasons. One, to show that he can do an action-packed film involving a comic book hero, and the other was, well, by incorporating Ron Perlman as the main antagonist for Blade 2. Yeah. And, even like, say, Del Toro told Mignola that if, after working on Blade 2, like if it doesn't succeed or anything like that, then yeah, there's no chance that, the attempts on making a Hellboy movie are going to happen. Not to mention that even Del Toro brought on board Mignola to be the designer for Blade 2. And yeah, Mignola had never done anything like this, but with what he did by being involved in Blade 2, being the designer, he did pretty well. Because, this is something comic book related and a superhero, so yeah, there was no doubt, and yeah, because that Mignola was going to fail at being the designer, because yeah, with what was brought to Blade 2, and well, sure enough, Blade 2 having come out and being a success, yes, that did show right there that Del Toro could make an action-packed film, especially with it being something to do with a comic book, hero, etc. Not to mention that some of those that appear in the documentary through archive footage, Wesley Snipes appearing in there, and the bit of behind-the-scenes footage of Blade 2. Wesley Snipes even stated that Blade 2 is his personal favorite of the Blade films. Yeah. And yeah, because again, with Blade 2 succeeding and showing that, yeah, Del Toro can do this kind of genre, and that Ron Perlman, yeah, was good at playing the villain, well, sure enough, not long after Blade 2's success, they were given the greenlit to do a Hellboy movie. Yeah, and even, like, say, there was one moment where, even before the movie began and production began, Del Toro called up Mignola to, do a bit of traveling because, scattering all the filming locations, and that will be perfect for the Hellboy film. Just, yeah, that adventure that Del Toro and Mignola have had and, like, what's described in the documentary were really funny and good. But, actually, because we take a break from talking about, say, when Hellboy is made into a film, because what's talked about next in the documentary is, more of those that are in the documentary, from, say, Ben Saunders, and also, blanking on the name, because, Henry Gilroy, because Gilroy, because they talk about, like, say, more on not Del Toro, Mignola, his art style and such, and one thing they bring up is that, Mignola not drawing extra lines and draws less lines and so on, and how he does, when it comes to, say, the backgrounds and stuff like that, and Tad Stone's talking about it too. Then there's one point where Henry Gilroy talks about when one time model artist Fabio wanted to do an animated show. Maybe it would be, say, Thor, and Mignola was involved in this, but unfortunately, this planned animated show, if it was like, say, Thor or something that Fabio wanted to do, never went underway, and not to mention that Fabio was not a fan of Mignola's style. Okay. I think, yeah, Fabio is the only one we know in this documentary who's not really into Mignola's work. Man, because who wouldn't be? Just, golly. No hard feelings on Fabio. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but still, like, how dare he does not like and admire Mignola's style. I guess that's just not his thing, I guess, but anyways. Oh, by the way, because, yeah, archive footage and photos of Mignola's father, Charles Mignola. Yeah, that's his father's name, so yeah. But after that, like, say, with, like, talking about, like, with when Mignola was almost involved in, like, an animated show. Well, being involved in more animation stuff, being brought to life, because, yeah, I was happy that this was brought up. And I was thinking, is this going to be brought up? Because this was another big thing to come in Mike Mignola's direction, you know, what he would do in his career. Yes, because... Again, I was happy that they brought this up, and they rightfully so talked about it. Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Yes. I had to. Mole! Alright, but point being on Atlantis, because, yeah, Mignola being hired to be involved in Atlantis with its style and look, and with the character designs, and, you know, even say, what's-him-face? Yeah, George, that I brought up earlier. You know, he too was excited that, yeah, Mignola was working on a Disney movie, and what this was, just, yeah, it was exciting. And the fact that Mignola was involved in the story and such, you know, working on the story for Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and, well, you know, unfortunately... Not much of Mignola's work in Atlantis, and with what's specifically described in this documentary. And yeah, because sadly, as we all know, when Atlantis first came out, it was not received that well. And Disney just, like, you know, basically washed their hands and just stepped back from Atlantis, you know? But, as the years went on, and as of today, because Atlantis being big in pop culture, and it's grown a cult following, and even, like, say, yeah... Dojo Cat, yeah, rapper and singer, she did at one point dress up as Kita, which, yeah, because, golly, looking at her cosplay as Kita, that was spot on, yeah. It's like, yeah, Kita in real life, so, yeah, no hard feelings on, like, say, with Kita being in the Disney parks. I'm just saying, this, of course, has to do with the cosplayers, yeah. Anyways, so yeah, so it's unfortunate for what happened with Atlantis, The Lost Empire, but again, because as the years went on, it got more love and appreciation, as rightfully so. Especially, yeah, because the fact that Mignola was a part of Atlantis, yeah, because that being a big influence, and, you know, remembering Mignola's work in Atlantis. But aside from Atlantis, and even when, like, say, Tad Stone's bringing up that, yeah, because his involvement in something Atlantis, because, well, having worked on the sequel to Atlantis, Milo's Return, well, I mean, Tad Stone's would find himself involved in some Hellboy animated materials. Yeah, those two animated Hellboy films where we have the cast of the Hellboy films reprise their roles, yeah, Tad Stone's being involved in those. Or, you know, like, say, when there was an attempt to do an animated show, there was a pilot for it, but it sadly never went underway, and that being The Amazing Screw-On Head. I'm sure you guys would be aware of this, yeah, and if any of you have the comics of Screw-On Head, where, you know, Patton Oswalt, you know, stating that he got the voice role for the butler of Screw-On Head, Paul Giamatti, as the titled character, and, you know, the fact that it has Abraham Lincoln being voiced by Corey Burton, and David Hyde Pierce voicing the villain, just, yeah. And seeing, like, you know, the pilot itself and what this planned / proposed animated show in the style of Mignola's art style and with screw-on head, it would have been something. It could have been. But again, it was not picked up, sadly. Well, I mean, at least, we do have the pilot, so yeah, what could have been? But just, yeah. It's unfortunate, but it's just one of those things. Yeah. Then, they bring this up, and you know what? Because, yeah, this is a very serious subject where, yeah, a lot of people, even I've kind of been in that same territory at times, where, yeah, people who feel like misfits. Well, the Dark Horse comics, most notably Hellboy, speak for all of those who feel like misfits. They don't belong in certain places, and where could they fit, and so on. And those that talk about that subject, even Doug Jones and Ron Perlman, is really well put, and it's understandable. And yeah, because who'd have thought that Hellboy and all of the other characters, the various stories from Dark Horse and from Mignola's very own universe of characters, would speak to all of those who feel like misfits. And, because with Hellboy and all those other characters feeling like misfits and being misunderstood and so on, just, yeah, that whole subject that's brought up in this documentary is amazing, important, and, very touching. Even Ron Perlman mentioning about his father being a movie freak, and Ron Perlman mentioning one film having a huge influence, and that being Charles Laughton's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Just, yeah, with what Ron Perlman says about that, and when talking about, like, say, when being in the acting business and such, just, yeah, and, thinking you might fail or something, how Ron Perlman specifically puts at it, just, yeah, very understandable. Okay, so after all that, now we come back to where we started with, a Hellboy movie finally being made, because again, after the success of Blade 2, now everybody wanted to work with Del Toro and hop on the Del Toro train, best said by Perlman, and in a perfect world, asking Del Toro what does he want to do, and that being Hellboy, and best said by Ron Perlman as well, Joe Roth, saying, yeah, okay, I can do that. And actually, I didn't quite know that, because, yeah, Joe Roth, I guess, being another someone else responsible for, well, bringing the first Hellboy film to life. Good on him. Well, not to mention that, the fact because Joe Roth was involved with Columbia Pictures, because I know that Joe Roth was involved in, like, say, Christmas with the Cranks, and, that same year, we had gotten the first Hellboy film distributed by Columbia Pictures, so, yeah. Anyways, with the Hellboy film being in development, in the works, and being made, and when the announcement was made in 2003, Mignola at one point, as well as some of the others, like, say, George, yeah, because being worried, and yeah, especially Mike, that there's a chance that maybe Hellboy, being a movie, is gonna suck, and yeah, Mignola was so worried about this. And not to mention that when it came to, testing out Ron Perlman, and Hellboy, and, doing some lighting tests and such, well, they just weren't able to have it be exactly like how it looks in the comics. Can't do that specific style, just, yeah. And what they were bringing to this Hellboy film, like, everybody was having a good time, but still, but especially for Mike, still wasn't really sure. He even had a few disagreements on the first Hellboy film. He did not like the romance that was in, the first Hellboy film, because that not being in the canon of Hellboy. And I guess this would involve the love triangle thing, because I know how some of you, and I know a friend or two, that is not a huge fan of the love triangle thing in the first Hellboy film, but for me, and with what I said in my review of the Hellboy film itself, like, it didn't bother me, just, yeah. Anyways, and another thing that Mignola disagreed on, and, like, he knew that this would look horrible in live action, the Gothic crib, because, we would have baby Hellboy in this Gothic crib, and I'm sure you know this too. And Mignola had to bribe Del Toro by not including that in the movie, and by giving Del Toro pages of the corpse. So in the end, yeah, the whole Gothic crib was not put in the movie itself, but I do wonder if they could have managed to pull that off. I mean, it's like, you know, the fact, because we have the character of Hellboy himself in pants and boots, because if you know the character of Hellboy himself, well, because we see him with shorts, and we can see his legs and his hooves. Well, yeah, I guess probably that would have not looked good at that time and for the first two Hellboy films, but they did manage to sneak that in. Just for, like, say, 1 or 2 shots when we are introduced to Hellboy. And if you know about this, because we do see him briefly in shorts and his legs and feet. But that was it, you know? The rest of the film, and for the second one, we would see him in these pants and boots, and, you know, that worked pretty well for the Hellboy character. But just, yeah. With what was going on with the movie, with it being made, Mignola worried about, you know, what could possibly happen with the Hellboy movie and how it could be received. Well, in the end, everybody seemed to really enjoy it. It became a big hit. And also, this was brought up at the very start of the documentary, where we got a very quick montage of everybody on the news, like, say, from Fox News or Conan O'Brien, just, yeah, some of the talk shows mentioning Hellboy. Just, yeah, that was really cool. And also, Ron Perlman brought up that he's not really keen, like, of the fans or something like that, you know, being surrounded by screaming fans or something, how he puts at it. And then, like, you know, it's brought up where, you know, Perlman and Del Toro had a conversation about, you know, Hellboy's popularity, because, you know, starting with the comics, it was 6,000, but with the movie, that would increase to 12,000. And Perlman's response, holy shit, just, yeah. And if we get, like, to say up to Hellboy 7, then, yeah. But just, yeah, overall, in the end, the first Hellboy film turned out to be no disappointment whatsoever. It was a success, and, yeah, Mignola seemed to be appreciative of it, you know? Not exactly as, you know, how it is in his comics and with the character of Hellboy, but still, you know? Look, I mean, you know, Del Toro and the others, they did their very best, and even though it's not really exactly accurate to the comics, still, you know, with what was brought to this Hellboy, we all love very much, just, yeah. And not long after the first Hellboy film came out, well, more good things would make their way to the character of Hellboy himself, as well as Dark Horse Comics, and with Mignola's work and his world of storytelling and with his characters. And this would be the beginning of the Mignola-verse. So, about the Mignola-verse, well, yeah, because, well, first off, because, like, some of them say that, you know, Mignola's not too fond that it's called the Mignola-verse, because according to him, like, it just sounds weird and such, but, but hey, in my opinion, this is me talking, you know, what other name could they have possibly come up with and such? I think, you know, the Mignola-verse makes sense, and that's what this is, you know, this comic book universe with Mignola's characters. Even Katie O'Brien, you know, stating that it's really grabbed on and such, and there's no going back. So yeah, and you know, because with the Mignola-verse, this expands the world of Mignola's imagination with these characters, and each of these characters getting their own comic books and able to be on their feet and have their very own adventures. You know, from like say Abe Sapien, Lobster Johnson, and a few others that appeared in Hellboy comics. They would get their own stories, like they did one of Rasputin, they did The Visitor, as I recall. Yeah, that's the name of that one. And what more that would come to Dark Horse, especially in the Mignola-verse, you know, because more people, you know, stepping in and actually having a hand at some of the Hellboy comics. Although, yeah, because as to, from Mignola, his wife, Del Toro, and the others say about this subject, well, because, you know, when it comes to, you know, others being involved in, like, say, Hellboy and being the artists, well, you know, Mignola, like, getting the getting the approval and, you know, what he has to say on this and that, and, you know, getting the final saying, and even, like, you know, from his wife and his brothers and Del Toro saying that, again, because he can have a temper and he can be considered like a grouchy man or something, just, you know. I mean, you know, look, because overall, Mignola is very strict and is very protective on his creations. Wouldn't you? Just, yeah. I mean, it depends. And when some others, like, yeah, because when they, those that appear in the documentaries, and yeah, their involvements in other Hellboy materials and being the artists, and yeah, because, like, you know, because we have, like, say, Christopher Golden, a writer of, you know, Hellboy, The Bones of Giants, and also Baltimore, and Tom Snygoski, if I'm getting the last name right. He's a writer, having done Young Hellboy and something to do with Lobster Johnson, and Dave Stewart having being a colorist and, you know, doing Hellboy, BPRD, yeah, and a few others here and there, and yeah, when they would step into the world of Dark Horse and doing Hellboy, and, you know, Mignola also pointing out that, you know, he can only, like, he has to be the artist on so-and-so, and the whole thing on him trusting others to do something Hellboy and such, just, yeah. It's understandable, but still, you know, seems as though that in the end, it all turned out good. Yeah. Yeah, and also because the fact that the Mignola-verse was nothing like, say, the DC universe or the Marvel universe, and this was not, you know, the Dark Horse universe. This was all Mignola. This was something of his own, and yeah, this being his own universe. And of course, you know, with Dark Horse not intervening or anything, you get my point. And after that's brought up, well, of course, when it comes to, say, making another Hellboy film, which of course being Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, well, that's not what was originally considered for a Hellboy sequel. It was going to be something different. I will put that in the text, with what Mignola was wanting to do specifically for a Hellboy 2. And yeah, because apparently, and I didn't know this, that the Golden Army apparently doesn't come anywhere from the Hellboy comics. So when Del Toro presented that to Mignola, that the movie's going to be about the Golden Army, that being the title of the sequel, Mignola's response was, what the F is the Golden Army? Literally using the F-bomb. And by the way, because, you know, there are a good chunk of times where, most notably, Mignola does let out the F-bomb. So, yeah. So, thus, yeah. Hellboy 2, the Golden Army being underway and being made and such. And Mignola, states this where, you know, he and Del Toro, they had a lot of fun on Blade 2, and the same for the first Hellboy film. But when it came to the Golden Army, not really, sadly. And this is where, yeah, unfortunately, you know, Del Toro and Mignola collaborating and bringing something to life, an adaptation, most notably Hellboy, yeah, because it did not look good on the two, and they had big disagreements, and it's not like that they were mad at each other, because it, you know, after Golden Army, you know, they parted ways, like, where they realized that, oh, we have to part ways. So, yeah, that's what basically happened. And I wouldn't say that their friendship ended, because even it's explained in the documentary where they are still friends. Not collaborating, but still, you know, they're on good terms. That's good to see. And also, the fact that, yeah, Hellboy in the movies, especially up to Golden Army, was nothing like, you know, Hellboy specifically in the comics, because basically, Hellboy in the movies was Del Toro's very own Hellboy, and how it's specifically put in the documentary. Yeah, I mean, well, obviously Hellboy still has to be Hellboy, and, you know, from the comics, but still, with what was brought to the character on the big screen from Del Toro, you know, nothing bad at all, because, hey, we all love what Del Toro has brought to Hellboy, and with Ron Perlman and such, just, yeah. Even Patton Oswalt, he mentions one thing about Hellboy 2 specifically. The sequence where Hellboy is taking on the monster tree, and with the monster tree being shot down by Hellboy, it's emotional but beautiful at the same time, and with what Patton Oswalt specifically describes is yeah, very understandable. I couldn't agree more with him on that. Yeah, because with Hellboy 2, The Golden Army being made, and, well, it was another success, and seeing some of the newsreels about The Golden Army's release and such, just, yeah. And also, it's mentioned by each Ron Perlman, Doug Jones, and Del Toro that what would come next for the three of them after the Hellboy films, yeah, they would still make it big time, because, yeah, like, Ron Perlman finding himself in, like, say, a movie with Nicolas Cage, or, like, say, one or two TV shows that Ron Perlman was involved in. You know those are. Or, like, say, Doug Jones, the later projects that he would find himself involved in, and where he would still, be playing characters that are aliens and creatures, like, most notably, The Shape of Water and Star Trek Discovery. And, yeah, for Del Toro, more movies that he was offered to take the helm on and be in the director's chair, like Pan's Labyrinth, Pacific Rim. I almost said specific. I gotta slow down. Or most notably, one of his crowning achievements, The Shape of Water, which, yeah, that movie not only being something big for Del Toro and Doug Jones, well, the fact because it would be a Best Picture winner at the Academy Awards / the Oscars. Yeah, and not to mention that, fun fact, because Del Toro once stated that if The Shape of Water had failed, then he would retire from directing movies forever. But that, thankfully, was not the case, because, yep, The Shape of Water turning out to be a huge success and a crowning achievement for Del Toro. And wouldn't you say, like, yeah, The Shape of Water would be, like, say, in the Mount Rushmore of Del Toro's movies. Like, there's that, Hellboy, and Pan's Labyrinth, and what would the other one be? Well, why don't you guys let me know in the comments section? I would know too, but still. Anyways, but yeah, not to mention that it's mentioned by some in the documentary where, yeah, when it would come to The Shape of Water, for Del Toro and Doug Jones, well, Hellboy, the Hellboy movies with Abe Sapien, that was like pre-Shape of Water. If you think about it, and well, because, in the Hellboy movies, we have a fish man that Doug Jones plays, and coincidentally, a movie that Del Toro and Jones would do that involves a fish man, although really it's an alien, that's what he is. Yeah, because the Hellboy movies with Abe Sapien, that was just an early taste that, yeah, where we have Del Toro directing a movie that does involve a fish man and such. Yeah. Okay, so we're almost at the end of the documentary, so last few things to talk about. So, well, I mean, because, yeah, with more people, and as I've brought up, where, yeah, being influenced and inspired by Mignola, and, well, because, like, say, when Mignola brings up about making thumbnails for the covers and such, and, well, when, trusting one of the artists and such, and, and by working on the Hellboy comics, and, not wanting to, let that artist down and such, and the fact, because, to let the artist do what he's doing, and not try to copy him, and so on, just, yeah. And, also, because, yeah, those that, again, being influenced by Mignola, like most notably Rebecca Sugar, and, Jason, Sean, Alexander, because, yeah. And, when Mignola would be very advisable, and spending some time with fans when they need some help and advice from Mignola, and what to specifically do, and what Mignola recommends. And, with what Jason, Sean, Alexander has to say when it came to, like, say, him trying to make his own comic, or when it came to, say, Rebecca Sugar, working and developing on Steven Universe, and he approached Mignola to help with some mythology and what to specifically incorporate into Steven Universe. And the iconic symbol of Steven Universe, and with his pink shirt, just, yeah. With Mignola's influence on Rebecca Sugar, with what she would bring to Steven Universe, and also the fact that Rebecca Sugar being a queer person, and by putting that into Steven Universe, and with what she specifically says is just amazing. Just, yeah. And also, another one being inspired, and Mignola being one of her heroes, being Lila Del Duca, if I'm getting her full name right, whom is an artist, and I presume, yeah, because she's a part of Dark Horse comics. Especially because having done, like, say, The House of Lost Horizon, and doing Sarah Jewell. Yeah, a Sarah Jewell mystery. Yeah, that's it. The House of Lost Horizon, a Sarah Jewell mystery. Having worked on Sarah Jewell, and basically Sarah Jewell, best described by her, that she's really that rare comic book hero whom is an older hero, middle-aged and such, and that's not really common in comic books and so on, the heroes of the comic books. And I loved this, where, yeah, Mignola and Christine's daughter making an appearance, Katie, yeah, because she wrote a story of her own, and her daddy, made that into a comic book, and that basically, being this, story about, a snake and a magician. Well, yeah, because it started off with, you know, Mike picked his daughter up from school, and Katie had drawn this picture of a snake on top of a tower being angry at these, you know, hovering geometric shapes, and Mignola said, "Stop. Okay, you need to explain on this story and such," and yeah. Well, and that would lead to this comic book being called, The Magician and the Snake, yeah. In fact, Mignola wanted to make a few changes to the story, but his daughter wouldn't have any of it. It stays the way it is, and, well, yeah. Who could argue with, how can Mike argue with his little girl? So thus, it became a comic book, and it did very well. Not to mention, good for Katie, because this got her an Eisner Award. That's interesting. And she was the youngest to win that. Cool. Good for her, yeah. Kind of getting in that territory, kind of following in her daddy's footsteps, just, yeah. Proud parents that she has, even, like, you know, with when Christine mentioned that her daughter having won an Eisner Award. Also, Mignola's brothers actually got involved in the comic book business as well, where they did their very own Pinocchio story. Yeah, and of course, Mignola being involved in that, and making 2 or 3 books of that. Just overall, it's pretty interesting that, seeing the Mignola brothers doing something as well, comic book related, and again, that being something Pinocchio, because, you know, Pinocchio being one of their favorite movies, the Disney version, that is. Good, yeah, so Scott and Todd, good for them, doing something of their own in the comic book business. And also, more mentionings of Mike, Scott, and Todd's father. Because, you know, by this point, and when the Hellboy films were made, their father was still alive and doing pretty well. And, you know, even though he didn't show it, he never said it, he was, in his way, very proud of his son Mike for what he had done, you know, making his own comic books and creating Hellboy. And it seemed like Mike's father, Charles, was very fond of the Hellboy character. He seemed to really like the character of Hellboy and be a fan of his son's own creation, because according to Mignola's brothers, their father took some friends to a movie theater to see Hellboy, and getting a Hellboy poster, their father wore a Hellboy hat, and even when one time their father was very sick at the hospital, their father mentioned something about Hellboy. Just, yeah, it was really awesome. Good to see that, you know, they had a good father. Even though he wasn't like that kind of father, aggressive or anything like that, you know, not a mean father or anything like that, no. He was just from that generation whom, you know, didn't show and express that he loved his kids and was very proud of them. Just, you know, didn't show it. In some ways, like, yeah, by his kids sensing that, you know, deep down inside, he was, but just didn't show it on the outside, you know, that whole thing. And yeah, like, the mentioning of, like, say, when, you know, their father had passed away, and with what happened there, just, yeah. It's unfortunate, but, you know, hey, it's good to see that their father lived to see, especially Mike, making a good success. Just, yeah. And I have no doubt because, you know, obviously, because Mike's father was a good father-in-law to his wife and a good grandfather to his daughter, without a doubt. And yeah, and one of the last things that are brought up in this documentary, well, how Hellboy has continued on to this day, being such an icon in the world of comics. And even when, like, say, it's brought up that worldwide in different countries that, you know, being translated in different languages, everybody around the world being fans of Hellboy, like if they're, like, say, from Germany, Japan, France, just anybody. And seeing some other people in the documentary whom are, you know, fans of Hellboy. In fact, one of them, Gary Ducampo, if I'm getting the last name right, probably not. He's credited, and, you know, he's a Hellboy collector. And we can see when he's interviewed and when he pops up in this documentary that, yeah, he's got a mammoth full of a whole shelf mammoth full of collectibles of Hellboy on his shelves, you know. Also, very briefly, Tara McPherson, if I'm getting the last name right, appearing in this documentary, and she's a toy designer, an artist, and yeah, when it came to, say, merchandise made for Hellboy, and Tara got to make a Hellboy figure of her own, making the design of it and how it would turn out, and just, yeah, from the pop vinyls, the plushies, the action figures, you know, just, yeah, how the love and appreciation for Hellboy has expanded, Mike being very appreciative of that. And also, can't forget to mention this because, you know, with the Hellboy movies, the first two, he did state this where he loves the people that love the movies and loves, you know, what, like, how did he say it again? Where, you know, he loves, like, what were specifically brought to the movies or something. Like, I just, like, how he specifically puts at it, like, yeah. I'm sure he's, you know, he seems to have some appreciation for the first two Hellboy films. You know, even though they're not exactly, like, what Hellboy's like in the comics and what Mignola does with his creation, his baby, still, you know. And, you know, because Mike, of course, being well aware and very appreciative and happy that, yeah, because with the Hellboy movies, the first two most notably, being the best Hellboy films, according to a lot of people, loving Ron Perlman as Hellboy, just, yeah. And also, you know, at the time of this documentary, because, yeah, the 2019 Hellboy film being mentioned some, and seeing David Harbour through archive footage and on Jimmy Kimmel, you know, talking about being the next Hellboy. In fact, there was one moment where Patton Oswalt got David Harbour and Ron Perlman together at a dinner. Just, yeah, that was really cool. Nice on Patton Oswalt. Well, because, yeah, Patton Oswalt, obviously being a huge fan of Hellboy. So, yeah. And some of the others that appear in this documentary only through archive footage, John Byron, if I got the last name right. I already mentioned Wesley Snipes, the Mignola brothers' father, Fabio. No archive footage, just like a photo of him. Dojo Cat, and yeah, that's all of them. So, yeah. But just, yeah. The last things to be mentioned in this documentary is, yeah, that, you know, even still, to this day, Hellboy getting more love and appreciation, you know, through the movies, the merchandise, and most notably the comics, that, yeah, Hellboy has become a phenomenon in the world and genre of superheroes, comic books, you name it. Just, yeah. And I love how the documentary ends off where, yeah, because, like, on a scrapbook or something, you know, at a convention, you know, Mignola with a book, and, like, we see the end, and, yeah, boom, the credits roll, and I love how the credits are done, like, seeing sketches, you know, drawings of the Hellboy characters, and some pretty good music, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, that's the documentary itself. Man, just, yeah. with all that was said in the documentary from beginning to end, those that were involved, yeah, and Adam Savage, because, yeah, I did, another mention on Adam Savage, just very quick, because if anybody else that I missed, like, Christopher Golden, yeah, because Hellboy, The Bones of Giants, Baltimore, Fabio Moon, he is a writer, an artist, he'd done, say, BPRD, Vampire, Lost Ones, just, yeah. Yeah, I think that's all of them that I've mentioned, so, yeah. But I was going to say about Adam Savage, like I said, because being influenced by the Hellboy films and with the creatures and monsters, he has some, like, props and replicas, I want to say, in his garage, you know, of some of the Hellboy characters, and like I said, where after the Hellboy movies, he would get all of the Hellboy comics that he could get, just, yeah. So, just wanted to mention that, you know, once more on Adam Savage, but just, yeah. The documentary, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters. It's an excellent documentary. This is the perfect documentary for us who are fans of Mignola's work, are fans of Hellboy, who have read the comics, loved the movies, anything from the genius mind of Mike Mignola himself. Oh, and by the way, because it is mentioned, and I wish I could remember this, but I will put a text where Del Toro gave him a nickname. Yeah, I have to put that, it has to be mentioned, and yeah, you're seeing the text. So yeah, had to get that out of the way, so couldn't forget to mention that too. But yeah, just again, the documentary, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters, is an excellent documentary, the perfect documentary for us who are fans of Mignola, his work, Hellboy, just everything that he has done. You know, everything that this documentary has to offer and tell, from beginning to end, whom appears in this documentary, the struggles that, you know, from Mignola, those that are linked with Mignola, like Del Toro, everybody just, yeah, amazing. The tough times that Mignola went through, but he managed to succeed as the years went on when it came to Hellboy and such, just, yeah. And one more thing to mention, because it's mentioned in the documentary because, yeah, with Del Toro and Mignola's friendship and the fact that it shows that they cameoed in the first Hellboy film where we see some trick-or-treaters, you know, they're in Halloween costumes, yeah. Mignola was a guy in a knight in shining armor, and Del Toro was dressed as a dragon. I actually didn't quite realize that they were in the first Hellboy film, but I just wanted to mention that very quickly, just, yeah. But, yeah. And, you know, with knowing Mignola that we didn't know of, you know, what he's really like, you know, knowing some of his personal life and his brothers, his wife and daughter, how he's influenced a lot of people, those that have admired and have been inspired by Mignola's work, and when loving Hellboy, anything else that he's done, and with Dark Horse Comics, those that are a part of Dark Horse Comics, what they have to say in this documentary, and when it came to the Hellboy movies, Del Toro, Perlman, Jones, just, yeah, what more do I have to say, really, by this point? The documentary, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters, excellent. And I'm giving this documentary 10 out of 10 stars. Yeah, because I really enjoyed this. 10 out of 10 stars for the documentary, Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters. And what about you guys? What did you think of the documentary itself? Any of you, like me, who are huge fans of Hellboy, you admire and are huge fans of Mignola's work, other works that he's done in the world of comics, like, you know, because when he did, like, say, Marvel, Batman, DC, the other characters that he's created in his very own universe, Dark Horse Comics, your experience with the Hellboy films, and, yeah, some history and facts that come from this documentary that you didn't know about until now, and what Hellboy means to you, and the work of Mike Mignola, if it's inspired you and such, and yeah, and just overall, did you enjoy this documentary? And yeah, just overall, what do you think of the documentary itself? And with what I've had to say, my review, and yeah, what did you think of my review? Leave comments and give this review video a like as always. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of the documentary Mike Mignola Drawing Monsters. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and I will see you guys in the next video / review. Take care, and peace out. Get Hellboy in here.